And let me introduce our two very distinguished discussants who are with us today. It is my really great pleasure to introduce Gábor Bolyár, who is in Hungary a very well-known opinion leader, but first and foremost, one of the most successful Hungarian entrepreneurs who achieved the global success building his company from scratch. He's the founder of Graphisoft, software development company, which achieved global success in quite a short time under his leadership. And now it is one of the leading architectural design software companies in the world. Mr. Bolyár is also the founder and leader of Aquincum Institute of Technology, which is a private university in Budapest. And he is now, during the election campaign, in a new role. He is among the economy advisors of the opposition's prime ministerial candidate, Márki-Zay Péter. Our second speaker is Dr. Garvan Walsh, who is a political strategist and the founder of Article 7 Strategies, and he chairs Unhack Democracy, which is an NGO and election watchdog. And he has also affiliation with the Martin Center and works with the ARENA program of the Ecora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. And he publishes regularly in titles such as The Foreign Affairs, The Guardian, The Economist, or the Polish Rzeczpospolita. He is also a former national security advisor to the British Conservative Party. And so just to give maybe a little bit of context and structure to our discussion, I thought of sharing conclusions of my paper from a year ago and check whether my conclusions are still valid today. So it was basically an overview of the opposition's and Fidesz chances 1 year before the elections. And among the factors that I thought were beneficial for the opposition, I mentioned the primary elections and announcing a clear goal of changing the government so that the very polarized Hungarian society may treat the elections as a referendum on Fidesz. And I was expecting that it is likely to increase voter activity. Among the challenges for the opposition, I mentioned the internal divisions, which, if not overcome, would definitely lead to defeat. I also pointed at other weaknesses, like some opposition parties being outside of the United Opposition camp, which can collect around 3% of the votes. That was the calculation around a year ago. And also the lack of common program, which would make harder to convince voters of the opposition's ability to govern. As for Fidesz, among the factors that I thought would contribute to an overall advantage, I obviously mentioned the constitutional majority. Second, Fidesz as the largest and best organized and most resourced party in Hungary. And third, the public media and most of the media market, which have been completely subordinated to Fidesz interests. While among disadvantages for Fidesz, I listed the pandemic, the recession, scandals around Fidesz oligarchs and the politicians, let's say, around their lifestyles and the documented enrichment through public funds. Also, kind of a feeling of wariness with Fidesz after 12 years of rule. And I also assumed that the government would be weakened internally by the unfavorable changes in the international environment. So the lack of a populist turnaround in Europe, the defeat of Donald Trump, Fidesz leaving the EPP, and this kind of changes in European and world politics. Now, if we check the polls from March 2021, they showed a similar support for Fidesz and the planned joint party list. It was back then 36 and 37% respectively. After a year, we see that it is pretty much the same. So according to the latest polls, it's around 38% for Fidesz, 36% for the opposition. This slight advantage of Fidesz is most probably the effect of a massive cash transfer voters received just a few weeks ago. And we have now around 26% of undecided voters. A year ago, this ratio was 27%. So the percentage of undecided voters is also basically the same. So what I want to say is that I was wrong that the joint start of the opposition and the competition between only two camps would increase voter activity. So it remains unchanged. Also, the opposition did not manage to increase its popularity. So all this effort they made with the preliminaries basically did not bring new voters, but both camps maintained their positions from last year, which brings me to the conclusion that voters' attitudes are very, very rigid. It's very hard to change them. And all factors I thought that were disadvantages for Fidesz basically have had no effect on Fidesz popularity. And here the control of the media has definitely proven to be a very powerful, if not the most powerful weapon in hands of the government, which we knew earlier, but when it comes to concrete examples and specific political situations, that it is even more striking. I mean, for example, that there have been hardly any channels to inform the society about the management of the pandemic. So statistics have been partly classified. Mortality rates, which unfortunately are among the worst in the world in Hungary, were simply not communicated. Or what we see today, I have to say, a very shameful propagating of the Russian disinformation narratives on the war which is going on in Ukraine in the Hungarian public media and state news agency, just to cover the fact that Hungary has been strengthening its ties and economic dependence on Russia, which is now, as we all see, committing war crimes. So just to cover this dissonance, we have complete disinformation in Hungarian public media. So what can, in the last few weeks, in spite of all this, influence election results? I was thinking about this question, and I assume that only something unexpected, an unexpected event, and such unexpected turn is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it's not only about the war, but also about the completely new political situation and the new security environment it causes. And we already see the deep changes it triggers in whole Europe, in the thinking of the European Union itself, or in German politics. And I think that if the opposition manages to build its campaign around this fact, around this new situation, then it's a factor that can be very useful from the point of view of the opposition. So this is what I wanted to say as an introduction, and now I would like to ask our discussants to make their opening statements or introductions. So what do you think, what are the most important or most characteristic elements of the political situation at this very moment? What factors may decide on the outcome of the elections? We have just 4 weeks until the elections. Maybe Mr. Boyar first.
Thank you very much. First of all, I am not a political analyst, so I can't make any kind of forecast how different issues will affect the outcome of the elections. I can just speak about the major differences between the values of the opposition and the Orbán government. As an introduction, in our history of over 1,000 years, we were part of many different empires, but never voluntarily. Last of those was the Russian Empire. But in 1989-90, we received an extraordinary gift from the history. We became free. And we had a chance, maybe first time in our history, to decide where we belong. And there are differences in priorities among conservatives, liberals, and socialists, but there is a firm consensus among 80% of the Hungarians. We belong to the West. Over the past 12 years, however, Prime Minister Orbán Viktor is trying to reserve this decision in 3 major points. And these are the 3 major points where the main differences are in basic values of the opposition and the ruling party. Point 1, instead of a Western-style democracy, Orbán has been building an authoritarian regime. Point 2, instead of a meritocratic capitalism, he has been building a crony capitalism. Point 3, instead of a firm commitment to the European Union and the NATO, he has been dancing as a peacock between the East and the West. Let's start with the first point. Orbán has proven himself to be an autocrat with the application of the salami approach in capturing the state through conquering autonomous institutions one by one, such as state audit agencies, central bank, fiscal council, competition authority, media council, and so on, while destroying the rule of law and freedom of the press. All these measures were endorsed by his 2/3 majority in the parliament, secured with less than half of the popular vote, magnified by gerrymandering, electoral districts, and applying a complex system of multipliers to party lists. Beside the denudation of the Western-style institutional framework developed painstakingly during the post-socialist transition, perhaps the most lasting damage is the decay of the educational system. This is particularly painful for a small country that excelled in medicine, physics, chemistry, mathematics, takes pride in a dozen of Nobel Prize laureates. Indeed, lacking a natural resource base, investment in human capital is the sole resource for Hungary's international competitiveness. And this leads to the second point. And this is my point. As an entrepreneur, I hate most the crony capitalism Orbán is building. Particularly because with his crony capitalism, Orbán is wasting an exceptional chance to raise Hungary. Just an analogy. Why England became the world's richest and strongest country in the era of the great discoveries about 500 years ago? Because its great traditions in navigating the seas. Today, in the era of the information revolution, our strong mathematical traditions and skills could raise Hungary similarly, as did with England the sailing skills some 500 years ago. But to capitalize on our math skills, we would need a real capitalism based on fair competition, where the most innovative and creative firms succeed rather than the good friends of Orbán. Had Elizabeth I appointed her closest friend instead of Francis Drake to run the England's fleet, I think England wouldn't have become the winner of colonization, and then consequently the Industrial Revolution. Hungary has a chance now to become winner of the information revolution. We just have to invest much more in education and build a system of meritocratic capitalism. Orbán is wasting this chance. This was number 2 point about the main differences between Orbán and the opposition. And finally, Orbán's peacock dance with NATO and the EU. In light of the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine, this point is the most dangerous one. In the last couple of years, Orbán voted against EU resolutions, notably condemnation of human rights abuses in China, Russia, Belarus, among others, more often than any other member country. The biggest outrage in NATO circles was caused by the Hungarian government's veto on Ukraine's joining NATO's Tallinn-based cooperative cyber defense center of excellence, while Ukraine has been under constant cyber attacks since the beginning of the year. He has now voted in favor of all sanctions against Russia, as he could no longer openly confront the EU in the current situation, but this is just another turn in his peacock dance. Orbán does not like the traditional values of the West, such as division of power, checks and balances, and so on. He believes the Western civilization is on a declining path and the future belongs to the East. He likes the Eastern type of governance much more, where his power would be uncontrolled. He may believe that with smart maneuvering between the West and the East, he may preserve his own sovereignty. He does not want a deeper integration between the member states. His priority is the so-called national sovereignty, but in fact, he means his own personal sovereignty by this. Being part of the EU, we naturally must delegate some of our sovereignty to the EU, but Orbán wants to keep this to minimum. He wants to be only in a loose free trade zone for mutual benefits without agreeing on common values. On the other hand, he very much likes the EU funds, but this is a contradiction. Fueling the economic development of the poorer member states from the richer ones' taxpayers' money requires huge solidarity. But the shared values are prerequisites to this solidarity. Unlike Orbán Viktor, the majority of Hungarians do share the Western values, not just the Western money, even if there are differences about how deep the integration should go within the EU. It should be deeper. For example, the 2 most visible achievements of the Union, the common currency and the free movement within the Schengen zone, are endangered without further integration. Common monetary policy will not work on a longer term without common fiscal policy and budget, and the free movement will not work without a common immigration policy and external border protection. Orbán is fighting against deeper integration. He is arguing that it would turn the EU into an empire as opposed to the Europe of nations. This one, the latter one, may sound nice, but we must see that our world is facing many global challenges: climate change, mass migration, mass terrorism, and there are no answers to these challenges within the national borders. But most importantly, without further integration, Europe will not be able to face the emerging powers of China and Russia, either, as we can see all now. 32 years ago, we have received a gift from the history, the ability to choose between East and West. And we Hungarians made our choice. We do remember, at least through our parents and grandparents, how our lives were within the Russian Empire. I hope very much that the majority of the Hungarians will understand now what is at stake. And on April 3rd, we will confirm our choice. We do belong to the West.
Thank you for drawing this broader picture of where Hungary is now, what historical moment. And I would ask Garvan to continue. I know that you might have some insights based on polling data, so we are looking forward to it. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the slightly nerdier half of the presentation. If you'll forgive me in a second, I will impose a couple of very small slides on you. I promise there won't be very many. Because you've all had death by slides for the past 2 years. And so I'm going to look at a couple of things. One is an electoral prediction model we have built for the 2022 elections. And the second one is based on some polling. It's from 2018, but it's a unique kind of sort of deep polling that applies statistical analysis to the polling, so gets things out that otherwise can't be obtained. And in particular, it identifies a particular type of swing votes that we called skeptical conservatives. So just bear with me 1 second while I bring up the data. Here we go. And move toolbars out of the way so I can actually start the slideshow. Here we go. So what we did was we used the data from 2018. We went down to do the individual precinct level data, and in each of the 10,000 precincts, we added up the opposition vote together and compared it to the government vote. We did this based on work that Unhacked Democracy did back in 2018 to identify irregularities. So we put that database into this. And what we wanted to ask was, what would have happened last time if the opposition had run together? Another way of saying this is, what's the effect of the majoritarianism in the Hungarian electoral system? And this allows us to look at how many seats they would have got had they been together. And then we can also, on top of that, we can see if the vote changed a little bit compared to then, what would happen to the distribution of seats in the Hungarian parliament. And the results are quite interesting. First of all, as you can see here, the actual results have the 2/3 majority that Fidesz got, with 133 seats and 64 for the opposition and 2 for one independent candidate and the representative of the German minority. So then we said, well, what if the opposition had run together? What would the results have been? So we put that into our computer, and the answer is Fidesz would only have got 101 seats, the opposition 96, and these other guys 2. So depending on whether we count the opposition, so the independent and the German candidate as pro or anti-Fidesz, you then get a very small Fidesz majority. This shows that the real way Orban's been able to dominate Hungarian electoral politics has been by keeping the opposition divided. So Mr. Boya, you've actually got a very good chance. If votes only need to move a small amount, even though everyone is pretty set in their ways for about, probably since 2010, deep convictions haven't changed that much. But if the opposition can run a very strong get out the vote operation, really, as they did in the municipal elections in 2019, then really you've got a very, very good chance. Running that operation, I don't know how that's going, but I'd strongly suggest you concentrate on getting your voters to the polls. So if we look at these two graphs, we can see if there's a swing. Now, a swing is when you take some votes off one side and give them to the other, what would happen? Here you really see how strongly majoritarian the Hungarian electoral system is. If there's a 0.5% swing on this, you get a roughly even result. Now, this model doesn't include the effect of the envelope votes from outside the country, but so you comment to that. Need a couple of other % to actually beat Fidesz on that basis. But if there's a 1% swing, it predicts about 104 seats for the opposition. If there's a 3% swing, which is the outside range of real possibility, you get up to 129 seats, which is just shy of what a 2/3 majority is. But it just really shows that even small changes in the system and in the vote end up with very, very distorted results in the end. He's created a system that looks proportional, but actually is really like the British system, where you can get a massive parliamentary majority on a minority of the vote. I suppose this is another example of what András Szájo called ruling by cheating. And now let's move on to the other bit of data. So this is the stuff I did with Johns Hopkins. And we segmented the Hungarian population into a number of different clusters. And we did this based on their voting intention and their trust in different types of media. And what came out of this was something very new. Instead of just seeing two bubbles of pro-government and independent media users, we found a bunch of people who used and trusted both types of media and tried to make their way between them. They're about 9% of the population. At the time of polling, they were evenly divided between Fidesz and opposition, roughly speaking. But when we did focus groups a few months later, we couldn't find, and COVID had kind of started, we couldn't find anyone who said they voted for Fidesz anymore. I don't know whether it might have swung back a little since then or not. I'd love to be able to do this polling again. It'd be really fascinating. These people tend to be center or center-right, either socially conservative or economic liberals. And they tend to live in small towns in the countryside, but be quite educated and well off. Think of lawyers in small towns, the doctors in small towns, other professionals who nevertheless don't live in the cities. And we asked them a few other international relations questions that I think are particularly relevant now. One is, which country would you like to be? Which if you wanted Hungary to emulate some other state, which one would it be? And the biggest answer, of course, that 40% didn't want to be like any other country. They just wanted to be Hungary only. But we have a big chunk of people wanting Hungary to emulate Germany, a slightly smaller chunk, slightly less than a third, wanting to emulate the United States, and 3% saying they wanted to emulate Russia. The figure among a segment that we call hard Fidesz is significantly higher for Russia. And if you'll just bear with me, technically, I need to move one of the Zoom windows, which is now obscuring this. So hold on a minute. If I move it out there, we can see that 8% of the hard Fidesz supporters want to emulate Russia. And we then asked not just about Russia, the country, but Putin the man. And this gives us something to play with here. So if we look at Putin the man, we find that there's a segment, particularly the hard Fidesz people, who pretty much like Putin the man. 40% of them have a positive view of him. This compares to 20 to 10% of the more liberal segments. And our skeptical Fidesz, skeptical conservatives are pretty much evenly divided within the margin of error between people who like Putin, dislike him, or haven't made up their mind. And where this gets us to, I'll stop with the sharing now. Where this gets us to is, I think, the question of competence. In our focus groups for the skeptical conservatives, we asked them, was there anything that particularly had caused them to become disillusioned with the Fidesz they used to support? And they didn't really say anything. What they really talked about was competence. They felt that a single unified government was more likely to provide coherent leadership to the country, but they'd started to feel that this was getting old and that this was time for a change. They didn't identify particular instances, whether it was the CEU expulsion or attacks on the rule of law, as sort of triggering a change of their behavior, even though they were worried about those things. But they really had a sense of competence, efficiency. They were really against the politicization of institutions like healthcare and education, and the appointment of cronies instead of efficient administrators to those posts. And I think that matters because Russia's invasion of Ukraine raises questions about the competence of Orban's foreign policy. If you think that balancing between the West and having a good relationship with Russia might actually make sense, which looks like the consensus of the skeptical conservative vote, if you average it out, you now have to ask whether that was really a good idea because of what Russia has done. And if you're someone who really likes Putin's macho style of leadership and strongly favors his traditional authoritarian ways because you think that kind of strong leadership is successful, you'll be asking yourselves, well, is that actually working? Maybe it's the Ukrainians who are actually the real machos here because they're fighting off the Russians so effectively despite overwhelming odds. I don't have concrete data on what's happening now. It's far too recent. I'd love to be able to investigate it. So I want to leave those things as questions. The question of competence, the question of which way are these voters in the middle going to go when it comes to election day in a month's time? And of those swing voters, who are going to be more enthusiastic? As we can see across the border in rather different circumstances, morale is crucial to any adversarial contest. And with that, I will pass the floor on to the audience so they can ask us some questions. Thank you.
I would like to add one more illustration what you said about the preference where to live outside of Hungary. You mentioned that among the hardliner Fidesz, core Fidesz supporters, there is a highest proportion of who would be ready to live in Russia.
Not live in Russia, but live in a country like Russia. So they would want Hungary to be more like Russia.
I just would like to mention what maybe non-Hungarian audience doesn't know, that the daughter of Orban with her family moved to Spain, not to Russia, and living in Marbella. Just an illustration about the preferences.
Indeed. I don't know, but maybe some of that's due to the weather. I'm not, perhaps.
In Sochi, there is beautiful weather next to the Black Sea. Beautiful. I can see that the sea is even nicer than in Marbella.
Thank you for showing these polls. Indeed, this is very interesting, and it would be interesting to know to what degree these preferences change. For example, in the effect of the war, which is now going on. And I remember polls about Putin's popularity from not too long ago, and although Putin's popularity wasn't very high, but still was higher than, for example, Chancellor Merkel popularity. So it's always important to see to what we compare these results.